Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Kimberly Blackarinka, and I'm the program director here at the Ignite Hub. Welcome to our guests that we have in the Ignite Hub, and welcome to our guests online. I'm so excited to see new faces here. There's a lot of new faces, so I hope that all of our new guests will continue to come back after today's program. We made it. It's December. This is the last Future of Tech Lunch and Learn for 2024, and we are definitely gearing up for 2025. I'll tell you about that afterwards, but welcome. We have a fantastic guest speaker today who has very deep ties to the Ignite Hub. So today's topic is Unleashing AI, Turbocharging Your Application for Tomorrow's Innovation. So AI is the hot topic that gets the most registrations for our events here at the Ignite Hub, which is great, not to say anything about our other topics, but what that tells us is it's a topic of interest, and that's what our community wants, and that's what the Ignite Hub will continue to provide. For today, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Alton Henley. I have a brief bio here. Welcome. It's okay. It's lunchtime. We know folks are coming from all over. So if you're just logging on or just walking in, it's okay. You're not interrupting. We understand. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Alton Henley, who is the Dean of Instruction for the Business and Hospitality Department at Montgomery College. Before he began his tenure on July 1st, 2022, Mr. Henley was the Senior Director of Information Technology Institute, a part of Workforce Development and Industry Partnerships at Montgomery College. In his role as Senior Director, Mr. Henley mentored over 70 part-time faculty and staff and managed over 300 courses per year. Prior to joining Montgomery College in 2013, Mr. Henley was an instructor and an academic coordinator at Howard University's School of Business and the Assistant Information Technology Director for the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus. Mr. Henley also worked for Amtrak as Senior Systems Developer. Mr. Henley earned a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Studies from Elixir College in Albany, New York, and a Master of Business Administration from Howard University in Washington, D.C. I will also add to this bio, as I said, Alton has very deep roots here with the Ignite Hub. You may or may not know the Ignite Hub is new. We've been here for about 2.5 years, and Alton was part of the team that helped design this space and the intention and the vision for this space. So it is a full circle moment to have you here, Alton, to actually present in our programming as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to you. Let's welcome Alton Henley.
Yeah. The very loud voice that you hear is Ricardo Ben Lazar, one of my former students and former friends. Wow. Any rate, as she said, my name is Alton Henley. I'll be talking about leashing AI. Now, today is going to be a bit of a mixture. We're going to be talking about some code. We're going to be talking about some business. We're going to be talking about product design. So it's a bit of a mixture. Next slide. About me, as she said, I'm the Dean of Business and Hospitality here at the college. But in addition to that, I have been programming since I was 9 years old. My mother taught programming at Florida International University, and she would take me to class with her. And you sit through the same class 7 times, even if it's COBOL, you start to pick things up. So I've been doing this for a very, very long time. Next slide. Now, as she said, there's an AI explosion, and everybody wants to get on the bandwagon. There's over 1 million registered developers working with OpenAI alone. And every product that you see out there has AI included in it, to the point that when the product that I'm going to be telling you guys about today was introduced to a local college and to their AI committee, one of their people said, it doesn't seem AI enough because there was no pause when you typed in your question and you got your answer. So people have an understanding that AI is the new hot ticket, and there's a concept called blue ocean strategy. And what blue ocean strategy talks about is that when you are dealing with the things that everybody else is dealing with, when you're fighting the same fight that everyone else is fighting, you're in the red ocean. That's where the sharks are fighting over the same meal. Does that make sense? Blue ocean is when you go where there's nobody else is there. You found a school of fish that's all to yourself. To give you an example, Cirque du Soleil, way before we got really woke and we started realizing what we were doing to the animals, they moved away from having animals in their circuses because they realized that the animals were the most expensive part of the circus, and it's what prevented them from being in the best venues. So they went from a red ocean going up against Barnum and Bailey and the rest of them to the blue ocean of just saying, we're just going to have the acrobats. Now, even before circuses imploded, this meant that you could go to Barnum and Bailey for somewhere between $15 to $30 a ticket, depending on where they were. But Cirque du Soleil's tickets were like $50 to $150, and they had much lower costs. And then when we had the circus implosion, all the other circuses were out of business, and Cirque du Soleil is the only one that still exists. Does that make sense? So one of the things that I was looking at when I was looking at AI is how is everybody else doing this? And how is it possible to do it differently so that you can future-proof yourself against certain things? And we're going to talk about what those things are. Next slide. Now, when it comes to using AI, here's the usual suspects that people talk about. We talk about code completion. We talk about code generation. We talk about direct AI usage. That's where there's a box where you type in something and then you get either a video or a picture or a resume or something that meets your criteria. We talk about content generation, which we're going to go really deep into, AI-powered search and analytics. But before we do that, we need to check some assumptions. Next slide. Now, my assumptions are that number one, hard drive space is essentially free. And I see frowns in the room. When I started programming, literally 47 years ago, we had to really worry about how much it costs to put something on the drive because hard drive space was extremely expensive. Compared to then, hard drive space is free, and we're going to get into that. The second assumption is that users hate waiting, and I think we can all pretty much agree with that. The attention span has shrunk and shrunk to the point that we have the attention span of a gnat. I think we're to the point now, I saw my nephew look at a TikTok video and he just swept past it because he didn't see the funny part within 2 seconds. It was like, it's too slow for him. And then finally, that AI is actually way, way too cheap and the price will go up, but I'll explain that. Next slide. So hard drive space is free. As I said, if you go back to the 1950s, a 256 gigabyte hard drive would have cost about $20 billion in today's money. You couldn't even buy it at that time. In 1967, a 1 megabyte hard drive cost $1 million. In 2009, the average cost per gigabyte of a hard drive was 11 cents. In 2012, it was 3 cents. And this particular report, the last time it gave data, which was November 2022, the cost per gigabyte was 1.5 cents. Next slide. And so this is the graph of the orange line is the cost per gigabyte of a hard drive. The yellow line is the cost for Wikipedia. If you took all of the data on Wikipedia, 24.5 gigabytes of data, if you take out the videos and the pictures, that's what it would have cost for you to take all of Wikipedia and put it in your pocket. Now, as you can see, back in 1990, it would have cost you approximately $120,000. Next slide. In 2002, it would have cost you about $45. Next slide. In 2011, it would cost you about $1. Today, it costs about 27 cents to take all of Wikipedia and put it into your pocket. So when I say hard drive space is free, rather than asking AI every time you need something, at the very, very least, if Josiah asks for something and then 3 seconds later, Ricardo asks for the same thing, you should have saved Josiah's answer so you're not forcing the user to wait. Does that make sense? And you have space for all of Wikipedia for basically a quarter. So there's no point in you ever deleting someone's query if you don't have to. Does everybody get that? All right, next slide. Now, users hate waiting. Google is the absolute commander on this because what they're doing is that from the point that you hit enter on the Google search box to you either click on one of the links or you move away, Google's measuring everything that you do. And Google has basically been saying since 2010, you shouldn't make people wait more than 2 seconds. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I use ChatGPT, when I use Jasper, when I use any of the AI tools that I use, I'm always waiting at least 3 to 5 seconds to get a response, right? Now, Google's John Mueller advised making sites that load less than 3 seconds since 2016. And this is for crawling reasons, not for ranking reasons. And they said that the probability of a bounce, the probability that someone will start to use your service and then just walk away from it, increases by 32% as the time goes from 1 second to 3 seconds. So as you can imagine, whatever your tool is, whether you're helping someone to find a new apartment, you're helping someone to order food, whatever it is, every extra 2 seconds you make somebody wait is a 32% chance, a 32% increased chance they're just going to walk away and use something else. Okay, next. So AI is too cheap. I know what some of you are thinking is like, that's not possible. The application I'm going to talk about, I generated all of the content in the application. I generated somewhere between 12 gigabytes worth of data for over 1,000 job postings for $16.72. It took 18 hours to run. I was absolutely amazed. It's something, given what it would cost to have people do it, I would have paid 2 orders of magnitude more for that than what they charged me. If it had been $1,600, it would have been a bargain. But at $16, I've literally run that job 7 or 8 times just to see if I get the same results. And this is a problem because, you go to the next slide. While there's 10 million ChatGPT users, they're paying $20 a month. And if you do the math, that's $2.4 billion a year. And they're going to increase it to $22 a month by next year, which will take us to $2.64 billion a year, and to $44 a month by 2028, which will take us to roughly $5.5 billion a year. The problem is they're spending more than $8 billion a year keeping OpenAI running. Next slide. So with more than 1 million third-party developers using OpenAI, I am one of them, they're estimating $1.3 billion in 2024 revenue, okay? So if you do the math, next slide, that means they have $3.7 billion in 2024 revenue. They have $8 billion in 2024 expenses. They're losing $5 billion a year. This is an unsustainable business model. The price of AI has to go up. They either need to make a catastrophic advance in technology, or they need to increase their prices, and not even by a little bit, because doubling the prices, if you take a look at that, won't be enough. Tripling the prices would be enough, but if you think about it, tech firms really aren't happy with 25, 30% profit margins. They tend to like 80% profit margins so they can pay for all that marketing, right? So that means they're probably going to have to quadruple their prices. Now, the idea is, just like with any other new product, we get you hooked on the product. We get you to the point that you can't live without the product, and then we raise the prices. Part of my history that Mr. Blackburn-Kahn didn't talk about is I started working in advertising. And in advertising, I have friends who still work or still try to work in advertising who've been freelancers in advertising for 30 years. So for 27 of those 30 years, they've had steady work to the point that it seems like they have a job, but they don't. It's just this week they're at this advertising agency, this month they're at this advertising agency, and so on and so forth. Since ChatGPT hit the field, things have dried up for copywriters. Things have dried up for illustrators. Things have dried up for desktop publishers. So when they say that, oh, AI won't take your job, somebody who knows AI will take your job, that's not true. AI is taking people's jobs. There's people who are losing their work because of AI. And right now it's not a problem because the ad agencies are still set up to both use AI and use freelancers. But what happens when there's no director of freelancers anymore at an ad agency? What happens when there's no creative director anymore at an ad agency? They're just used to using everything, sending it to the AI. Then if the price goes through the roof, there's no way for them to go back. Does that make sense? Okay, next slide. So AI is too cheap. Next slide. Now, code completion, A lot of people talk about code completion. Code completion is the idea where if you start typing something like for I equals 1, 2, the computer will complete the code that you need in order to do this. Code completion is not really a crutch. It's just more of something that speeds you up. The two that I've tried are GitHub Copilot and Codium. Codium is my favorite, and I'll explain why in a second, but GitHub Copilot is one of the biggest ones in the world. And partially because if you use GitHub, Copilot keeps jumping in, kind of like Clippy did 20 years ago, telling you, oh, would you like some help with your code? No, I don't want any help with my doggone code. Leave me alone. Now, Codium, part of the reason why I like it is Codium has their own LLM. So whereas these other tools are using somebody else's LLM, they're using somebody else's AI, Codium wrote their own. So for instance, when when OpenAI went down last night, Codium was still working, right? That's part of the problem with using someone else's AI, that when their AI goes down, you go down with it. But if you have figured out a way so that you can either store your results or you're using something else, you've become proof against that. Does that make sense? Next slide. Now, direct AI usage is cheap, but like I said, the price has to go up. Now, it's also slow. As I said, there's that delay that happens automatically when you make a query. Now, there's ways to speed that up. One of them is Ajax. So if you've ever used a web form where you start typing something in, like on the Expedia, you start typing MI, it's like, are you going to Miami? Because generally people don't autocomplete that with Milwaukee. It's like, are you going to Miami? Are you going to Santiago? What have you? And then it just automatically does that. So what you could do is when someone starts typing in their question, you can try to anticipate what the question is they're going to ask, submit that to your AI immediately so that once they're done typing, you have the answer. But you're going to have varying results with this. Another way is using autocomplete. And the third way is the way that I went with was predict, precompile, and pre-save, which is the idea that, for instance, if I'm Canon Computers, I have a whole line of products. One of my products is a copy machine, but most people don't call them copy machines. What do they call them? Xerox. They call them Xerox machines. If I'm Canon, odds are I don't have the word Xerox anywhere on my website. I don't want the word Xerox anywhere near my product description. So when you have AI search, what it allows you to do is it allows you to say, if someone asks for a Xerox machine, what type of machine are they probably asking for, right? And since I'm Canon, I know that people are probably going to use other names for things. So what I can just do is I can just create a database where I've pre-filled it for all of my products. When someone wants a copy machine, what are the 10 terms they might use other than copy machine to ask for that? When someone wants a digital camera or an SLR, what are the 10 terms that they might use other than SLR to ask for that? And then I save them so that when you come along and you type in Xerox, it immediately shows the 17 different models of Canon copy machines. Does that make sense? Without any delay, without any reason for you to go to the AI, and also without any extra cost. Because if you think about it, how many times do people go to Canon looking for a copy machine and print Xerox? It's probably a ton. You don't need to keep asking the question from the AI every time it happens. If you've saved a result, you asked once, you paid the literally 1/100th of a cent for whatever that was, and then you never pay it again. Does that make sense? And yeah, just go to the next one. Now, stored AI, which is what I did extensively in this application, is where you generate your content. And there's a number of ways to do this, and we're going to actually look at some code examples of what I did. But my application is replacing something called the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which was put out by the Department of Labor. It's a site that will help you understand what a job is, what it takes for you to do that job, and what it would take for you to get that job. So we needed job descriptions, we needed lists of potential employers, pathways, resumes, and translations. And I was able to generate all of this from AI. And one quick word about translations. People were like, why are you using OpenAI to do translation? Why are you using AI to do translation rather than just using Google Translate or something like that? And here's the reason why. We've been working on translation software for a very long time. So we have software that'll kind of word by word, sentence by sentence, figure out how things work. But when you think about how an LLM works, you're taking a document, a ton of documents, and you're inputting them into the computer, and it statistically knows what is the word that's next most likely to come after this word, right? So for those of us who went to Howard University, if somebody says you, the next word you know is going to come out of their mouth is no. There's a 98% chance that that's going to be true, right? So for translations, you've taken all of this great literature in Spanish and put it into the LLM. So where Google Translate will give you a book translation that sounds like you're somebody from a college that won't sound natural to anybody on the street, OpenAI will give you a translation that sounds natural, especially if you tell it, translate into Spanish from Spain. Translate into Spanish from the Dominican Republic. To a Dominican, it's going to sound amazing. To a Puerto Rican, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Right? But it's because of that statistical analysis that the AI does that it's able to actually give you a better translation than Google Translate will give you. Does that make sense? All right, next slide. So powered search. Now, like I said, calls to the OpenAI API are relatively slow, and the same is true for all the rest of them. People hate to wait, and most people search for the same things in the same way. So as far as the Department of Labor is concerned, your primary doctor is called physician, right? So, but we all know that people will probably say, I'm looking for my doctor. If you're looking for a pediatrician, you might say, I'm looking for a baby doctor. There's all of these terms that would automatically come to people's minds. So I merely put in a query to OpenAI to say, give me the top 5 terms or the top 10 terms that someone would use to look for this job that isn't the words in this job. Does that make sense? So instead of baker, it was pie maker. It was a patisserie. It was all of these other different terms. And then once I've created that list, I have a way to power my search that not only isn't dependent on whether or not OpenAI goes down or not, but also works immediately. It runs so fast that like I said, I was literally told this can't be powered by AI because it's running too fast. Does that make sense? Next slide. And analytics. So like I said, Drive Space is essentially free. Whatever application you're thinking about, whatever application you work on or that your company is working on, think about the possibility of every time a user does something, record what they do. Everything they click on, every page they go back to, every time they log on. Take that information and store it into your database. You would literally have to store the equivalent of Wikipedia before it even cost you a quarter. We already discussed that, right? So what happens is, for the analytics you do today, you're certainly going to have the data that you need. But what about the analytics you do tomorrow? So tomorrow, next week, the year after that, you're worrying about branding. You might be worried about your ability to handle people's different backgrounds. It might be a DEI thing. And you're going to say, oh, I wasn't recording that data. I don't know. Record everything. So from an AI standpoint, data analytics is only getting better. It's only getting more powerful. And the only way that you can really future-proof yourself against that is to store literally everything that you ever do. And if you do actually, and people are like, well, what if my site is really big and I have so many users, I don't have space to put all the data? What if I hit the lottery and I need boxcars to store all my money in? I mean, it's kind of the same problem. If you're that successful, that's a good problem to have. And that's why there's a thing called data lakes, where you can take all the data offline, put it into another structure so that it's still there for you to do the searching from. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. So you want to store everything. You don't know what you will want to analyze. And if you do actually run into size problems, you can offload your data to a data lake. And it may seem basic. The things that I've just talked to you about are things that almost no application that's out there right now is doing. It was kind of interesting to be able to go through last night and figure out which AI services use OpenAI and which ones don't, by which ones were down and which ones weren't. And some people will say it's kind of like using Amazon Web Services. It's so big that if it's down, everybody's down. So you shouldn't have to worry about it. But everybody wasn't down. And the people that weren't down were crowing about the fact that their services were still up. And you want to be one of those services too. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. So I have code to show you. So this is a Jupyter notebook. I did, the application I wrote is written in Java Spring Boot, but I did all of my data manipulation in Python. So for those of you who aren't aware, and like I said, I've been programming since I've been 9. I programmed in over 30 languages in my life. COBOL is the most horrible language I have ever used. Java is my least favorite language that I'm competent to hold a job in, but Python is beautiful. If you don't know anything else, you're going to want to learn to use Python. And in Python, it's relatively simple to interface with OpenAI because this is basically what I did. The code to interface with OpenAI is this ask function right here, where it says def ask. And the thing is, OpenAI will provide you this code. You don't need to know how to use it or how it works. Just know that when you take this particular function and you feed it a prompt, a question, it will answer the question to the best of its ability, right? So for instance, when I first was getting started with doing my descriptions, I first said, my terse ask, write a short description of what a job title does, and I dropped the job title in there. Does that make sense? So I was like, what does a barber do? What does a doctor do? What does a college professor do? And it gave me back a result. Now, some people, has everybody heard the term hallucination in reference to AI? So when a hallucination is when AI gives you an answer that doesn't make any sense given what you said to it. And what we found out, for the most part, is the more open and general your question is, the more likely it is to lose its mind. So much like dealing with a difficult roommate or a recalcitrant child, you need to be as specific as possible when you're talking to AI, right? So these questions, write a short description or writing an essay, weren't nearly specific enough. Once I got to the point that I was telling it a career pathway is a list of work experience, education, certifications, and licenses, skills development, and professional development necessary to be qualified for a position. These terms should be used as section titles. What is the career pathway for being a position? That's the job title. None of the elements should be numbered. The section titles should be displayed as the headers. The elements within each section should be displayed as a bullet point with a bold title followed by a description, and format it using Markdown. I got rid of 98% of the hallucinations. Notice I didn't say 100%. I still got hallucinations that I didn't needed to fix after it was done, but this was an amazing amount of work compared to when I just said, give me the pathway for career, because not only were some of them wrong, some of them were vastly different from each other, so that when I was going to present them to users, they would look very, very different. So you might sit there and go, well, I can use AI, but I don't want to have to format the data. If you tie your question down tightly enough, it'll format the data for you. Does that make sense? Now, scroll down. So when I asked it to create a resume, the first time I said, create a sample resume for someone looking for a job as a position. And some of the resumes were like professional resumes. Some of the resumes looked like they were written by a 5-year-old. Some of the resumes were just like fanciful. And so I had to actually tell it, you are a career counselor for a workforce development board. Create a sample resume for someone. No, we need to move over, not down. Create a sample resume for someone looking for a job as position. This resume should reflect suitable education, certifications, licenses, and experience. Yes, and experience for someone eligible to land a job as this person. Format it using Markdown. Once I started using this much longer one, and you might ask what Markdown is, I'll get to that in a second. Once I started using this much longer one, I started getting resumes that were equal in complexity and all looked like they had been written by an adult, okay? Now, Markdown. Markdown is something that we use in document creation to show where you're going to have bold, where you're going to have underlines and things like that. And the reason I said Markdown rather than HTML is that generally Markdown is at the beginning of the word or the beginning of the line, while HTML has opening and closing tags. And so in order to get the Markdown looking right, it's easier to edit it than it is to edit the HTML when the HTML is wrong. And I could actually tell either Python or Java, or probably most languages at this point, to convert the Markdown to HTML so that I can display it on the web page. Does that make sense? All right. Let's scroll down. Now, this was my favorite. You're a career navigator for a state college. Write a detailed job description for a job title. Write it in the style of a college essay. The description should include the following sections: what they do, job responsibilities, essential skills, educational pathways, career prospects, and conclusion. These terms should be used as section titles. It should be written in paragraph form, format it using Markdown. It should be written in Spanish. Oddly enough, when I ran the job to just create the descriptions, the English descriptions took longer than the Spanish descriptions. And what I believe that is because of, there's far more English documents that have been read into the LLM than Spanish documents, right? And then I took this output and I showed it to my friends around campus who are native speakers, and I was like, does this sound okay? And the only time they disagreed is people from different countries. So someone from Spain said, oh, this was fine. Someone from the Dominican Republic was like, this sounds insane. But once you got to the main parts, they sounded similar. So in the interest of making sure that I didn't have any hallucinations, I did have a friend read through all 1,096 descriptions, and I owe her money, to make sure that it made sense and it sounded comprehensible to her. But this was AI being used to do translation, because I had built this whole thing of code to use the Google Translate API, which is far more complicated than using this, and it was going to take forever. And then I was just like, let's see what OpenAI is helping me with everything else. Let's see if OpenAI can handle this. And it can. Scroll down a little bit. And the one that I'm working on now, and this one has got an insane number of hallucinations, is I'm asking it to create a day in a life essay so that someone could see what would my day look like as a software developer? What would my day look like as a cybersecurity? And as near as I can tell, it's pulling information from stories. It's pulling information from like science fiction or movies, because as someone who's worked as a software developer and someone who's worked in cybersecurity, when I read it, I was like, that's not the way it really works at all. So I'm still working on that one. But this is part of what's possible when you're using AI. And these are ways that you can use AI that kind of future-proof your application. So like I said, I have an application that I worked on. It uses AI extensively. And last night, it wasn't down at all, because all of my AI is stored in the database. So when OpenAI goes down, I don't go down, right? When OpenAI gets slow, my site doesn't get slow. It's just every quarter or so, I'm going to rerun my code so that I can update my postings and make sure everything happens the way it does. And it's going to take 18 hours, and then it's going to be done. Now, some people will say, well, how do you know that the price has to go up? Maybe the price will go down. It can't. It absolutely can't. There's two things that say that it can't. One, the fact that they're losing money hand over fist right now, and they're expanding at a growing rate. They're going to need to raise the price just to slow people down a little bit. Like, has everybody heard about Sona? Okay, so they just added a module where you can use ChatGPT to create video. And they introduced it on Monday. They had to close signups Tuesday night because they had over 1 million signups to use this feature. So OpenAI Sona. So it's coming for everything. And the more power that's being used for these more expensive things, it's going to shut down the power that's available in the system to do everything else. They're going to have to raise the prices. And if your business is based on every query only being 1/100th of a cent, and if the queries go up to 1/10th of a cent, you're going to go broke, you're in trouble. So, like I said, there's techniques you can use. I've discussed them to make certain that you're not asking the same questions over and over again, that you're growing your information base, and that you're making certain that when your users ask you a question, when your users try to use your tool is ready for them. Does that make sense to everybody? Excuse me? Any request that you make of any request that someone makes of your application. So if it's something that needs to go to AI to have answered, so if you're just blogging, then no, you would be able, probably you'd be able to type your blog. But I know there's some blogging platforms that are trying to use AI. They're trying to autocomplete for you, say, oh, you might want to say it this way. That means they're repeatedly taking your text and sending it back to the AI to see if there's a better way to say this. But the problem is, what is the statement? There's nothing new under the sun. Odds are, if you say something like, in a world where, that's already been said 32,000 times, right? So you can take those phrases that everybody's using, see what the AI says they should be changed into, and save them, so that when a user comes on your blogging platform and types that in, you automatically know what to tell them to change it to without having to send a question and pay another 1/100th of a cent. Does that make sense? Okay. Is there any questions? Yes, sir.
Capacity in terms of our electrical infrastructure, as well as generation capability.
Well, I mean, AI in some ways is taking over where crypto was taking us to our limit. And so one is going up in a way where one is going down. So it's going to be a bit more before that becomes an issue. But I think that we're going to see, number one, we're going to see more data centers placed in places like Milwaukee or Norway or Minnetonka or someplace like that, places where cooling isn't as much of an issue, and so there's not as much power consumption. But the models are getting better and better. So the O1 model is worlds better, certainly, than ChatGPT 3 was. And 3.5, I don't think 3.5 was better than 3. It was just more human-like, but it was actually kind of crazy. But 4 is definitely better than 3 was. So the models are getting better and they're getting more efficient. They're just not getting more efficient than they're gaining users, to your point. So yes, the amount of power that's available, and the fact that the price of power is going to go up, is going to be one of the limiting factors on AI. But I don't doubt that you have Microsoft and Google and others basically building power plants and data centers in places to try to make it as cheap as possible.
Of 3 Mile Island.
Right, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to, one nuclear power plant is a drop in the bucket. Last I heard is that crypto is at its height was consuming more power than the 17 smallest countries in the world. And OpenAI is on path to outstrip that by far. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. So through your development process, did you test this against models that are open source and free?
No.
Okay. Because I was going to ask.
You believe in those? I don't.
Well, it came up because the notion you stated is that you don't want to be reliant on, the bigger companies like OpenAI for when it goes down.
Right. So when I save myself, I'm not reliant.
Exactly. Okay.
Part of again, as a business person as well as a developer, part of my thing is being able to control costs. I would rather know for a categorical fact that it's going to cost me 2 cents then it maybe cost me a penny, but it maybe cost me 5, right? So Ricardo and I have had this debate for years, building it yourself versus using somebody else. I would rather lock somebody else into a contract and use them rather than build it myself, but he feels otherwise. So no, I didn't use, I didn't even look at one of the open source ones.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Are you finished building your own software like AI?
My tool is done, yes.
Or your tool is done? Okay.
Yes.
I know that you emphasize a lot about storage, right?
Right.
And that your app or the website would help us basically retain all that information versus open AI or chat GBT doesn't to this point?
Right. So what I meant by that is my application is written in such a way that I don't need to worry about AI being up because I've stored all the data. I've stored all the answers to all the questions in my application. It's about 12.3 gigabytes worth of data at this point, and I store it all so that when there's questions, the answers to the questions come up automatically rather than there being a delay.
Right.
Okay. So that was the key thing I was making. So if you don't know anything about search, you might not, if you don't know anything about AI, you might not realize what I did. You just know, oh, when I search for doctor, or what would be, maybe a lot of search engines wouldn't understand that if you search for Bay, you're looking for a significant other, right? And AI would be able to figure that out. If you've done the search already and you save the results, your app would be able to figure that out. The average person would just go, oh, when I say Bay, this knows what I'm talking about, and this other one doesn't. They won't realize why it's better, but they will realize that it speaks my language and it responds to what I wanted to do, and this other one doesn't.
So that being said, do you have a patent for that already or no?
It's not patentable.
Okay, so therefore, if in the future, when these other companies, huge monster company, are able to do the same thing that you're doing
Why
now,
we're talking about it today.
right? What would be your second selling point in selling your application to the public?
Well, one, I work in academia. I'm clearly too pig-headed to make money. So to me, it's more important to see that everybody else is doing what they can to future-proof their application than to try to tie something down as just belonging to me. And like I said, I worked at the patent, this copyright, it's actually copyright. Everything is copyrightable, but I don't believe it's patentable. It's what's called obvious declination. The idea that you would just take the results and say that are ancient, we've been doing that since almost the beginning. The idea that you would do it ahead of time is what's relatively new. I don't think it's patentable, but even if it is, I would rather that people like yourselves were using this to make your applications better and make your applications more resilient than to see, because think about it, Amazon used to be just a store, right? And then all of a sudden, they started offering all of these products. And you keep hearing about people complaining that my product was doing really well, and then Amazon Basics started selling something that was exactly like my product. So Amazon purportedly is using the data from the people that they're selling for in order to undersell them. And Amazon Video only exists because Netflix used to run on Amazon's network. So rather than any of you running the risk of your application getting snatched out from under you by some AI company going, this is a really good idea, why not make it so that everybody can save their data, they can be safe? And if push comes to shove, you could go back and do it the manual way once you've already gotten things out in front. Because you could literally go in and say, okay, I know if somebody says baby doctor, what they mean is pediatrician. I know if somebody is pushing crumb crusher driver, what they mean is bus driver. And you can just punch those in by hand. It'll take longer, but it's possible. But the idea of making it so that you can future-proof yourself. Is what I would say.
So your main idea is basically just to enhance the application, not to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
gotcha.
And here's one more thing. One of my cousins went to the boot camp here and got a really good job at a law firm. And he built an application for this law firm that was doing queries against the patent database API. And it became so popular, everybody in the law firm was crazy about it. They were running it against all of this stuff. But he was running it as a new query every time he ran it. And it was going through all the items listed in the patent database. So eventually, some systems administrator at the patent office, but they were never expecting that. They were expecting you to look up the patent for this monitor arm, or to look up the patent for that table. They never expected people to run through all the patents in the database. And they eventually made it so that it was impossible to do that. And then all of a sudden, he went from being the golden child at his law firm to them going, programmers don't know anything. And I asked him, why didn't you ever just save what you were doing as you were doing it? And he was like, it was free. I didn't think it was a problem. So keep in mind, anytime that you have data that you have available to you, work under the assumption that it will get snatched away, and do what you can to protect yourself and to protect your application against that happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's like Google almost never goes down, but there's way too many companies or even schools that the search function on their website is powered by Google, and there's no failover. If Google is down or Google's not working or is inaccessible, you can't search that website anymore, which is horrendous if you think about it. All I'm trying to do is figure out how to get my major. And you're sitting here telling me that it's not working. And to me, it's not that Google's not working, it's you're not working. And so maybe I go to a different company or I go to a different school.
Kind of sounds like your focus lends more towards niche applications in a sense that you want to be more directed so you can grab all that data. Because you compare it to Google search, it's such a broad spectrum of data to try to
I
collect.
would argue that Google search is a niche application.
Okay.
Think about it. The number of applications you use things like Airbnb, you use things like DoorDash, you use things like Uber, Uber Eats. All of those are quote unquote mainstream or normal applications. All of those could benefit from storing the data. Instead of every time you go somewhere on Uber and it going to, I don't know, Google Maps or wherever they're using, I'm willing to bet you at this point, they have all the location data stored in their servers. So they don't have to worry about using some external third service. I'm just saying that for smaller applications, for smaller developers, you can do the same thing.
So I did have one question. Going to your analytics field.
You just have a question.
I'm doing that more of a comment, but so my question is about analytics. I was intrigued by the concept of using AI for analytics, right? The way you described it is collect as much as you can, let the AI do the heavy lifting. So my question to you, what is the idea behind presenting it to the AI? Are you looking to retrieve your tables of some sort and then present it as a document to the AI at that point?
No.
Okay.
So if you're using Power BI or even Tableau, both of them have the feature within them that you can present it with a table. And on Power BI, I believe it's called Insights, where it will just give you a list of things that it thinks it's found connections between. And you can just go between them and say, okay, there's a connection between before tax and after tax revenue. Yeah, that's obvious. That's not something I'm concerned about. But it will pick out the nuggets because it's basically taking every column in your table and comparing them against each other and seeing if there's a relationship. Something that is far too tedious and time consuming for most human beings to do. So I don't have to give it to it in a special format. I literally just point it at the table that I've stored all the information in and see what it says.
Oh, okay, so you're actually telling open, in this case, you use OpenAI, you're pointing it to open.
I mean, it doesn't have to be OpenAI, it could be any
But
AI.
any of them, but you
So-
point it to the table.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So it sounds like your concept is to take dynamic data and make it static. And then your issue is going to be how fast you update the static data with the new dynamic piece.
Right.
All right. So you're constantly taking that static data And that's what your user is actually getting access to. And only if there's a question outside the norm will you ever go back to the dynamic source to capture that new set of data and make it into your static data set.
Right. So if you think about it, DNS, proxy servers, information desks, this is how they work. Probably 1,000 people a day come into the information desk and say, I want to major in nursing, or I want to major in business. Probably far, far fewer of them come in and say, I want to major in underwater basket weaving. So the ones that they're used to answering, they can just answer off the top of your head. Oh, those seem handling.
Yeah, the FAQ.
Right. So the ones they're not used to answering, then they're going to have to pull out the guide and look it up themselves to be able to answer your question. It's that same model, just doing it in code. And as far as it being static versus dynamic, you're absolutely correct. But even running this 18 hours, I could run it daily, and it would cost me $16 a day, which isn't a ton to run this type of application. But even if I ran it weekly or monthly, it would probably be far more often than it's likely for the description of the job of a pediatrician to change.
Well, yeah, so those type of data sets that don't really change that often.
So that's the thing, most data sets don't change that often.
Okay.
Any questions?
You just end up with a response that may not be the most accurate, or?
You're absolutely right. It's a very good question. You are liable to pull from data that isn't that accurate, but also, if you think about it, you probably know if your data set is one that changes often. So if you're creating like the, what is the dictionary? The Urban Dictionary, if you're like creating a new version of Urban Dictionary, the terms change so quickly, you're probably not going to wait once a quarter like I do to do the updates. You're probably going to want to do the updates once a week.
Okay, got it.
Right? But even then, if it's used enough, you'd still be saving money by storing your answers rather than asking on the fly. Do you have a question?
Is this for searching on Google, or you have an actual website that you can ask a question to?
No, this data is being stored to run on my application. So when people search on my application, these are the answers that they get.
Okay, where is your application? Is it posted? Can we view it?
I was kind of tiptoeing around that because I don't want to seem like I'm popularizing myself. If you type in pathfindersi.com. So this is pathfindersi.com. It has a listing of 1,096 different job titles. It gives you, for each one of those, could you click on this link for registered communities?
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Henley. No.
So for each one of those, it'll give you what they make, how many of them there are, how much it's going to grow, a description of the job, what they do, job responsibilities, essential skills, hit on compensation, how the compensation compares to all occupations, or in this case, just healthcare applications, and even across industries if you scroll down. And all of this data, this data that you're looking at right now actually comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's just not in this form. I dressed it up, made it cute. And there's things in here that I didn't realize. So for instance, I guess it's not true for nursing, but there's a lot of business and IT fields that the highest paying industry is not finance, it's not IT, it's mining. Like mining and the oil industry pay out the nose for IT people and for finance people and accounting people. And I think the reason is, generally speaking, if you're an accounting major, you're thinking about working for the Big Four, you're thinking about working for a bank, you're not thinking of working for Sunoco, right? But, you know, they have a lot of money. They have a lot of money. So this is to help people figure out where they want to go and what they want to do. And for instance, if you go to A to Z listing.
Small change can reap a lot of return.
Right. So this A to Z listing doesn't have 1,096 entries. It has 5,000 entries. And this is what I generated using AI to say, what are the other terms that people might use to ask for X, right? So it was like, well, for sailors, somebody might say an able seaman. For education administrators, somebody might say an academic dean. For musicians and singers, somebody might say an accompanist. And some of them I knew, but some of them I was surprised. I didn't know that that was another term for that. But when I contacted people I knew who either were in that industry or were close to it, they were like, no, that's a valid term. And it's something someone might ask. And part of the reason I came up with this is when I finished a project back in the summer, and then some students used it, and somebody was like, it doesn't have all the jobs. I asked for a consultant. But as far as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is concerned, a consultant is a management analyst, right? But the students don't know that. It didn't say consultant, it doesn't have all the jobs, right? So I needed to come up with a search that was AI powered. And I don't know how who here has used AWS other than Josiah, but I have had the nightmare of using AWS and forgetting I turned something on.
Okay.
And then my free year expired and I got a $700 bill out of nowhere. That's like a slap in the face. So I was like, I'm not getting any unexpected bills. I need to know exactly what I'm spending when I'm going to spend it. Does that make sense? And I think my time is up. Okay. So thank you so much for your time. See, if you were not here, I would answer.
I know, right? How were you able to extract all that information from BLS to this website? And how long that usually takes?
They have I hate to be that guy. If you go to my site and go to the About page, it talks about how it was made.
Oh, okay.
Right.
It talks about how it was made, and the government is really good. There's this thing called public domain that because it's federal data, it's free, and they make it really easy for you to download. So it's huge. It's 27 different tables that are all linked. It looks crazy. And it's about 1.5 gigs all on its own. But, and it took me a better part of 2 or 3 weeks to figure it out, but all that data was available for me.
Are you sticking around? Are you available outside of here for anyone that wants?
Yeah, immediately.
Okay, great.
Because we still have lunch, right? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alton, for that amazing presentation. Very informational. I saw everybody very engaged. So thank you for educating us about that. Before we wrap up, we have a few things. We have a survey. We'd like to know, what did you think of this presentation? Would you like more? Are there other topics? So online, a link will be put in the chat for you to be able to do that. And Anthony is furiously working to get the QR code up on the screen. So when that comes, please fill that out. January is our infrastructure time at the Ignite Hub. So that's when we pull our data. That's when we look and we make decisions. Thank you, Anthony. About programming. So please take time to do that. Also important to know, this guest speaker series and our fireside chat is sponsored by Verizon. So thank you to Verizon, as always, for sponsorship of this guest speaker series. Following this portion of the event, we have lunch available. So again, thank you to Verizon so that we're able to offer a community meal. And continue with the networking and the talking, and Alton will be staying. So that's another opportunity for our in-person guests to be able to continue the conversation. Lastly, as I said, this is our last guest speaker series for 2024. There's more coming in 2025 in February. We are going to have a guest speaker talking about her experience as an entrepreneur in the health equity space. So talking about that at tech. And then we also have AI as well in February, and we'll be talking about AI from an entrepreneurship perspective. So how can you use AI for your brand? So please make sure that you are signed up on our newsletter so that you get our notifications. We try not to blow up everybody's email box, but just enough that there are reminders and that people can sign up as they receive it. So that's the close of my announcements. Myself and on behalf of the Hub team, Anthony and Eduardo, thank you to everybody who came in the fall season. We hope to see you again in the spring. Have a wonderful winter break. Thank you.